So we continue here our look into functions. What I want us to do for this assignment is I want us to look at some built-in functions that Python has and try to replicate them. So I'm gonna here in the Python shell, for example, I'm gonna give you an example of a built-in function. There's a built-in function called max that takes as many parameters as you want to give it, and it returns the biggest number in the list of parameters that you gave it. So I gave it the parameters 4, 5, 6. Well, in this case, I gave it the arguments 4, 5, 6, and 0, and it returns the maximum value of those arguments. In this case, 6. There's also the min built-in function, which again takes as many parameters as you want to give it, and it returns the smallest number that you give it. I keep saying parameters. I mix parameters and arguments. Just understand that this right here is called an argument. In this case, there's 4, and these are 3 arguments that I'm giving to the min function. So there's other functions, built-in functions like the pal function, which basically takes 2 parameters, 2 arguments, 5, 2, and it takes the first argument and raises it to the power of the second. In this case, 5 to the power of 2. Or if I did pal and I did 2 to the power of 3, that's 8. I believe there's also average. No, there's no average. Okay. So I think this is at least 3 is good enough. What I want us to do then is I want you to replicate these built-in functions. What I mean is I want you to make them. So suppose that Python didn't have these built-in functions, how could we make them? And what we're going to do here is I'm going to kind of sort of get you started, and your job is to finish up. So we're going to define the main function, which is where we once again start our code, our implementation, because we're executing the main function on line 4. And within the main function, I want to basically test these built-in functions by testing what I've replicated. Now, we cannot call them max, min, and pal because those functions are already built into Python. So we're going to give them slightly different names. If we just capitalize everything like max, notice that if I type here max with all caps, it is not going to recognize this command because the function, built-in function that gets to you the maximum value is all lowercase. So is min and so is pal. And so to avoid mixing the two, because if I put max here, it's gonna run the built-in function, and we don't want to do that. We want to write these. So I'm gonna write max, and I want you to put for max and min, 2 numbers is enough. So meaning 2 arguments is enough. I'm not gonna require you to code for more than 2 arguments. So it is safe to assume that you're always going to have only 2 arguments in your max and your min functions. So here, for example, if I try testing max and I send it 2 arguments, it should give me something back. It should give me back the bigger of the 2 arguments, which I'm going to store here in a variable called bigger, bigger equals. And then I'll do here for smallest or smaller equals min, again, all caps, and then I'll put 7 and 30. And so in this case, it should return 7. And then again, I'll say the power here, the pal function. So I can call the answer here just answer, or I'm going to write ants, which is short, pal. If I gave pal the pal function 2, 2, that means 2 to the power of 2, which it should give me 4. So you're going to replicate what I have on here. Once again, I'm getting you started. And then we want to print bigger. We also want to print smaller. We want to print answer. I'm going to change this just so that we can, because 2 and 2 can be confusing sometimes. So I'll put here 6 to the power of 2, which I know is 36. 6 times 6 is 36. When I hardcode 7 and 30 and I send that to the min function, it should return to me the smaller of the two. So in this case, it should return 7. And then when I send 8 and 0 as arguments to the max function, it should return to me the bigger number of the two, in this case, 8. And so your job then is going to be to define all these three functions. Max. And we're also going to define min. And we're also going to define pow, all caps, okay? Notice that that's the only way this works, that if I have max here, I have to have defined the function beforehand. Also, you always need as many parameters as you have arguments. So I have one argument, 2 arguments. So I'm going to need 2 parameters here. I'll fill this one in for you. So A comma B. Where 8, when you get to line 11, because we always start our execution in the main function here. We're executing the main function. On line 11, bigger equals what max returns when I send it an 8 and a 0. That means that if you go to from line 11, you're going to jump to line 2, and A will be 8 and B will be 0. And you are supposed to return A or B. Now, I'm writing A or B here, but that's not what I want you to do. I want you to return A if the criteria is met, otherwise return B. So again, trying to clarify here, you should then have 2 return statements, return A, return B, but you can only return one of those 2 quantities. And the way you determine that is, well, that's your job. I want you to figure out whether you should return A or B. And so there's a conditional statement that you should code in here. Remember that what you want to return is a bigger number. So if you have 8 and 0, you send 8 and 0 to the max function, it should return 8 because 8 is the bigger number. But we don't want to put here return 8 because sometimes you won't send it an 8 and a 0. So there should be 2 return statements. If you think back to the validate function that we discussed earlier in class, I wouldn't say it looks a whole lot different than what I mentioned in that function. For min, it's going to be very similar, and for pow, once again, also 2 arguments, so you need 2 parameters. For pow, there's a little bit more to it than just basically a simple return statement. Here, you need to figure out a way to take the first parameter, in this case, the 6. So I'll put here A and B. There's no reason why. You can use A and B for every single one of these because they don't know that each other exists. The max function doesn't know that the min function exists, and it doesn't know that the pow function exists. And so these variables A and B, when I declare them here, they are only going to exist here locally in the pow function, which means that they're not being confused as between the 3 functions. Now, what you need to do in this this particular function is you need to take A and multiply it times itself B times. Meaning, if A is 6, you need to multiply it, and B is 2, you need to multiply 6 times itself twice. So in this one, I would suggest that you consider doing a loop. Now, whether you want to use a for loop or a while loop, I'm going to leave that up to you. It is the more challenging problem in this assignment, but that's okay. So at the end, you should return a value. So all 3 of these should return something to you, to the user. I erase that one because technically we can only return one thing, or there should only be one return statement. However, if you have something like an if-else condition, you can put out the return statement in the if and in the else. So let me recap. We define the max function, we define the min function, and we define the pal function. There's code here that's missing that is your responsibility to work on. And then in the main function, we're testing everything. So in the main function, we're testing the max function by sending it two arguments, 8 and 0, and it should give me back the bigger of the two, the max. That's why it's called max. So bigger should be 8 under this scenario here where I've hard-coded these. Min, I'm just going to send it 7 and 30. And so smaller should be 7 because 7 is the minimum. It's the smaller number. And then finally, ans is going to equal whatever power returns when I send it a 6 and a 2. And so that's 6 to the power of 2, which is 36. Ans should be 36. And so that's what I want us to do. I want you to work on these. Let me know if you have any questions.